Welcome back to the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, and today we are joined by Chelsea Colwell-Pasch, who is the President, CEO, and Senior Archaeologist for Colbr Consulting in New Brunswick. She has a BA from St. Thomas University, a Master's of Maritime Archaeology from Flinders University in Australia, and an Executive MBA from the Quantic School of Business and Technology. She is also a scientific diver and dive master and a founding director of the Fairfield Foundation. Chelsea's company operates in New Brunswick, and among the reasons that she's joining us today is to discuss mechanized testing technologies that her company deploys in New Brunswick and what the work is like in that region. Welcome to the podcast, Chelsea.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to discuss the machine that you use and discuss deep testing in New Brunswick. Wondered if we could start off just by asking, this is sort of our typical show when we have someone on to discuss a machine. What is the machine? How does it work? What does it look like? Could you sort of describe it for us?
Yeah, so long as you put the $6 million man music behind it while I'm explaining.
Emmanuel, you've got
You
your
heard the woman,
cue.
Emmanuel.
We can dig them deeper. We can go
Yes.
better. Yeah. So it's I call it a mechanical auger testing and screening, and it's more of a suite of methodologies. But our intellectual property we have patents on is encased auger system. So it essentially uses a 60 centimeter. Our test pits here in New Brunswick are 50 by 50 centimeter square. And so we've modified. I can't dig a square hole with a machine yet, but we've modified by going into a 60 centimeter diameter test pit, cylindrical test pit, and we just over test by about 12.6%. And essentially it's a 2-foot wide narrow flight auger bit that is encased in a rolled steel encasement that has the regulatory 1/4-inch screen size holes on the outside. It's attached to a skid loader, skid steer, specifically high flow with a counterweight. And so we essentially dig test pits mechanically. And then there's a suite of screening mechanisms. We have modified aggregate screens. We have trommels that have been modified for wet screening. We even have barrel screeners that go onto another skid steer. And as you know, every site is different. You don't know what you're going to encounter until you dig that first test pit and you're like, wow, I'm not prepared. I brought nothing to address this sort of issue. So we've kind of just made a mark for ourselves here in New Brunswick by testing sites that may not have ever been testable in the past, and just figuring out what the problems are. And my favorite part is solving those problems in the field. It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to describe the machine. So it includes a screen. The screen is built. There's a screen built on or that encases the auger, but there's also then auxiliary screens for situations where you basically can't use that screen.
Well, there are situations where you can make the apparatus go horizontal and you could rotate the bit inside, and you can use that as a rudimentary trommel. But for the most part, we do a lot of deep testing here in New Brunswick. So that's a lot of sediment. And while maybe dry, fine sand will go very nicely through the auger holes, it will not push somewhat wet silt through it very well. Imagine those Play-Doh hairdressers that you used to play with and push the hair out. That's exactly what it looks like. So we have a whole suite of different screening methods.
Okay, I feel like I maybe missed a Canadian deep cut. I don't know what those Play-Doh things are.
But, like the Play-Doh kitchen thing too. Like you can make like spaghetti with maybe you didn't play with Play-Doh. I don't know.
I guess I missed this. Yeah,
and we're learning more about your childhood, I think, than we.
I guess so. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to send you a package, Gabe.
Please do. Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple times that what it's targeted for is mostly deep testing, basically, right? Or are there other challenges that you developed it for? So essentially, what prompted you to sort of develop the technology, and what issues are you looking to address with it? And along with the design too, you mentioned deep testing, and if I remember correctly, you go down, like, you can still excavate stratigraphically with this, like, it's not taking everything out all at once. So can you go? So what is it meant to address, and then sort of a little bit more detail on sort of the actual, like, digging a test pit protocol.
Sure. The impetus was essentially that monitoring, archaeological monitoring, it sucks. It just does. There's no eloquent way to put it. You have a lot of responsibility. You're standing outside in the elements while there's an entire crew, in some instances, getting ready to do their job, and they're banking on the fact that you're not going to find anything. And a lot of these sites that we used to monitor or still monitor, they are sites where maybe shovel testing could only go to 1.2 meters, and they're going down to 3-4 meters below surface for a sewer line or something along those lines. Additionally, if we hit water in a test pit, we have to arbitrarily stop testing. And I just hated monitoring. Made me feel like I was going to miss something. And sometimes you're standing 5-10 meters away from an excavator looking for artifacts, sometimes the size of your pinky fingernail. And there just has to be a better way. We put people on the moon. Surely we can figure out how to test some of these sites before construction happens. And so that's kind of where the impetus was addressing the deep testing. But what came out of that in the last decade of doing oh my goodness, I'm dating myself. Can you believe I started when I was 16? Joking. But one of the things that came out of it was that the auger actually is very suitable for going through fill layers. So in an urban environment, we can actually dig through asphalt, for instance, which, you're doing a walkover, you see this big parking lot and there's cars in it, and it's just like, okay, well, unless they strip that off with an excavator or a bulldozer, you're not really going to be testing that. We've been able to even weave between vehicles and just top it up, backfill it, top it up with gravel, and get those test pits dug without needing to have other people's equipment on site. Wetlands. So while wetlands are considered low archaeological potential in New Brunswick, there are a very specific regional type of wetland that is specifically known as historical land use, and that's Acadian dike land. And so that's 400 years of historic history and artifacts that we're not actively looking for, because the wetlands, it's very hard to test in, and it's considered low archaeological potential. So we've recently been working on that. Other conditions that make testing maybe unsafe, unhealthy, contaminated soils. You might not want to have your head in a meter deep test pit that used to be a heavy metal refinery, something along those lines, or even an old Texaco gas station. But utilizing the machine is kind of having that one step of removal, and doesn't mean that this testing can't happen, which sometimes I know clients and developers would really love to say, oh, too bad, it's contaminated, nothing we can do, we just have to move forward. Chance find procedures, their favorite. But just because it's hard to do doesn't mean we don't do it. It just means we figure it out, we're kind of pioneering some of these testing methods. First, you get good at something, you work out the kinks, then you get fast at it, and then you share it with other people. So the same problems we have here in New Brunswick with testing and monitoring and deep sites, wet sites, contaminated soils, they have that elsewhere. Maybe not the winter archaeology problem. That's a very niche Canadian slash
Well,
North American.
they use concrete saws out here in northern BC to cut test pits in the in the winter, which I don't think anybody wants to be subjected to. So, yeah.
No, and I can tell
Sounds
you it's
fun
much.
once.
Yeah,
Like, I'd like to try
once.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just once, and
Yeah.
I can tell you, digging test pits from your machine that has a heated seat and Bluetooth, and you can listen to your audiobook, and the test pits are the exact same size every time. They take the exact same amount of time, in January as they take in July. And for the most part, they're dry because sublimation. It's so cold out that the actual water freezes and freeze dries and things screen beautifully. I could talk about the winter testing applications all day, but it's addressing a lot of really specific limitations and problems that we've been encountering in New Brunswick, and archaeology as an industry in general. And we've had great success. And the only real issue we've really had is my inability to really talk about it or publish anything on it, because we've kind of gotten really busy. And that's almost exclusively what we do now.
So, and so we can return to the winter arc thing too, I think, in a minute, because that sounds interesting. But so, in addition to the benefit of being able to listen to the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast while you're using the machine,
I was going to ask what the audiobook was.
yeah. So
Every day, guys, every day.
Yeah, excellent. So as you know, we're kind of packaging this this is building on a conversation we had with Holly Luxinger and Carl Keebler about the recent SAA Geoarchaeology Task Force Statement on Deep Testing for Terrestrial Sites and Professional Qualifications for Geoarchaeologists in CRM, focused on the U.S.
Rolls off the tongue.
It really
Rolls
does,
off.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
The and one of the points that they made was that deep testing is a valuable tool ahead of CRM. And their perspective, though, and I thought this was just really interesting, so I've asking both you and Brian about this, was that they were thinking of it not primarily as a way to identify archaeological materials, but to refine the geological understanding of deeply buried landforms. And so, is this how you think of your mechanical tester, or do you think of it more as a kind of traditional shovel test pit dug with an auger? What's your sort of view of this?
First of all, I think the GTF, and I think they should all get bomber jackets that have GTF on the back. I think they were spot on. There is a lot of predictions we can make based off of geology, based off of LiDAR, based off of mapping. However, there's still just a prediction until you actually get your shovel or your auger or your core in the ground. You're just making highly educated guesses. So they are absolutely right that geoarchaeology needs to be the step before testing. We don't want clients, we don't want developers to be paying for thousands of test pits in an area that actually does not hold the potential that it's supposed to have. And so they're absolutely right that it needs to be more surgical, it needs to be more specific, it needs to utilize these experts in finding where the highest potential is, what depth you need to get to, and kind of what can we learn adjacent to whether there's artifacts or not in a test pit that each test pit can give us that will build on that knowledge. Because we have almost 30,000 test pits mechanically dug in the province of New Brunswick. That's a lot of data. And so it would be great to have that data utilized to maybe hone some of these models and provide some more insight. So that being said, this machine is, I'm a very simple person. It specifically just addresses the logistics and methodology of systematically, probabilistically sampling the soil to the bottom of the cultural sediments, if possible. Currently, our machine cannot reach the depth required in certain parts of our beautiful province of New Brunswick, which is just ripe
like really
with
deep alluvial deposits.
Right. And we're a beautiful province full of deep river valleys, water-incised shorelines. We had massive glaciers. I had isostatic rebound. We had glacial lakes that were covering the entirety of the center of the province. We had marine incursion. We have shorelines that are kilometers inland and kilometers out in the bay. And so we have this really dynamic, interesting history in our province. And it's confusing at the best of times. Even if you've had 20 projects in an area, you're going to find something new every time you do your background research about the geology, about the surficial geology, the bedrock geology, the forest soils, like all of that stuff. It's always evolving. You're always learning. And you could be 10 meters away from your last location where you did some testing, and it could change that drastically because of the dynamic history of water distributing sediments in New Brunswick. So
I
that's
think so.
essentially what we
Yeah,
wanted to address was
yeah. So
taking that surface testing and applying it as deep as possible.
we have a really coarse grain understanding of what the sort of late Pleistocene, early Holocene landscapes of New Brunswick looked like, right? Like we've got there hasn't really been a whole lot of concerted geoarchaeological work done in that regard. But you said you've excavated like 30,000 of these mechanical test pits, and presumably a lot of this stuff, the onus is coming from, for example, evaluating what could be potential paleo shorelines and all these other locations. And are you finding like that our ideas or our models that are guiding us to those particular locations, are they holding up? Like, are you getting a sense that like it's kind of arbitrary? Like, what do you find is more reliable? Like, is it the archaeological predictive capacity? Is it what you're looking at and seeing in surficial geology? Because, like, surficial geology maps are fantastic resources, but they're also fairly coarse grained, right? And so are you finding in your testing that it's supporting one or the other, or are you finding like, does your data indicate, that we maybe need to do refine models, are you feeding? Is there information that like the geologists are getting from you guys as you come out of this, or is this sort of all what you were talking about before, that like you've got a flood of data, it'd be great to do something with this, and what do we do now, kind of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's really hit or miss. There's certain parts of the province where it's like it is so close. You're within maybe 5-10 meters of what the modeling, predictive modeling, is telling you you should expect to see. And then there's parts of the province that you are like you're way off, in the tens of meters of elevation off. And so that all has to do with, like I said, the dynamic nature of our post-glacial geological history. But it also has to do with the fact that there's parts of our province, this big, beautiful, relatively undeveloped province, that archaeology just hasn't been done because we are development-driven archaeological prospectors. So you have parts of this province where no archaeological investigations have occurred, or at least cultural resource management wise, permit issued archaeology. And so we have no idea. We have really good estimates, and the geologists have all of these really good models. But in terms of the fine grain, if I can use that really great geology pun, we're not having any of that information we're collecting kind of be applied back to the modeling. And, that is a lot of things go into why that's an issue. A lot of the time, the information, the data is retained by the client, and they therefore own that data. Who do you give it to? What format do they need it? I think I would blow the brain of the regulator if I was like, hey, here you go, here's 30,000 waypoints and vertical data information for the province. They're so busy. I can't imagine they'd be able to do anything with that except get high anxiety. But I even had the ability to talk with provincial geologists. Someone you actually recommended, Ken Serge Allard. Yes, and so he was on a project of mine where we were kind of looking at superficial geology to determine whether or not predicted paleo shoreline actually existed in a project or not. And I was fortunate enough he came out on site and we got to discuss LiDAR and kind of the fact we have all these test pits worth of data. And is that something, for instance, he and his group would be interested in having, because they do their testing, on, 1,000 meters, 4 kilometers, 10
Yeah, they're
kilometers.
really big. The quadrats, I think, is what the like. It's a really large grid system. Yeah.
Right. And so while that might be ideal for hitting geological surface or subsurface features, for archaeology, yeah, like I said, you could change between 10 meters, 5 meters away from the last known stratigraphy. So it's really a missed opportunity that we're not having that, if I can, use a really overused term, synergy. We're not having that synergy with other closely related disciplines where we're collecting this information anyway. It's part of our regulatory required documentation. But how can we use this to help generate better models for our province, which we all use and will all benefit from?
Do you hear that, listener? If there's somebody out there looking for a PhD or a postdoc project, we're in search of a good geoarchaeologist here in the province to tackle this question.
If we could talk just a little bit more about the data that you can get from this machine, Chelsea. We've talked a little bit. You mentioned it can't always go as deep as you would like, but I gather it can go very deep. And when it's going very deep, is there a way that, how do you maintain stratigraphic control? Is it like, do you stick a tape measure down after it? Tell us about that process.
Yeah, and I probably forgot to answer that when you asked it earlier. I just get excited and focused on what I want to talk about. But
no, that's all right. I got excited and forgot to ask it. So
you got to remember, I'm one of the co-hosts, so that's you don't need to apapologize for going on tangents.
Perfect. We're just going to be a whole bunch of cats just trying to hurt each other. It'll be great. 5 hours later, we have a 30-minute podcast. So essentially, we have a graduated scale on the exterior of the auger casing. So when the need arises, so I'll qualify saying that the majority, 99.9% of all the testing we do is presence absence. So that's just, if you picture a giant 2-foot diameter column down to what we call archaeological bottom or culturally sterile sediment, or maximum auger depth, which is about 2.9 centimeters currently below surface.
2.9 meters?
Sorry, 90 centimeters, 2.9
okay,
meters.
Yeah.
Deep testing, we can go 30 a foot down.
I thought I'd identified a flaw in the technology there.
Yeah, there's your problem.
Yes,
it's a very shallow mechanical.
Yeah.
It's ideal for like sod cutting.
Yes. That's we do the pancake model where we go very wide and shallow. But so we do majorly presence absence testing. So the whole premise of what we're doing with this machine is, if there is a site on this project footprint, our goal is to find it. And a lot of the time, our clients, time is money. They want us, first of all, archaeologists, you have to have a strong backbone. No one wants you on the project. You're very risky. They want to know how long something's going to take, what you're going to find, what the next steps are. And all you have to say is, well, it depends, it depends, it depends. So we are on a project, we do the testing, we go to whatever depth is required, and it's pretty much presence absence. For your listeners, that just means that the test pit is either positive for cultural resources, and that could be historic items, could be features, could be indigenous pre-contact artifacts, hearth features, those types of things, or negative, which means we have not identified any archaeological resources in that test pit. And I want to make sure I say that the presence of absence of archaeological resources is not the absence of presence, meaning just because a test pit's negative doesn't mean that land wasn't used, lived on for millennia. It just means that the objects that would be that would survive our relatively acidic soil in New Brunswick were not visible. And so I'm a completionist. If anyone out there has ever played Skyrim, I do all the side quests. And so when we do our testing, we collect everything. So that could be the old Dorito bag, could be, if you do any ditch archaeology in New Brunswick, beer bottle fragments. And the reason we
Alpine
do
camo cans.
Alpine camo cans and the odd
They're very hard to
broken.
find. They're practically
So-
invisible.
Come to me. I've got maybe a 2-4 in my warehouse, but of cans, guys, cans from the ditch. But essentially, we collect everything because we need to show our work. It's like archaeological version of long division. See, we're looking for things. This is what we're finding. It's just not the things that would maybe significantly impact a project or warrant registering a site. And it's litter for the most part, so I'm not going to throw that back in the hole. I'm going to take that and take it out of the project area. But it's also interesting. At some point, maybe in a century or two, someone might want to know what the most prevalent flavor of Dorito chips were in 21st century New Brunswick. And, at least we'll have that data from our camp. But so it's showing that work. So what that graduated auger casing allows us to do, let's say we have a positive test pit. We let our regulator know, they request us to do the radial test pits around the positive, and we can do that stratigraphic control. We can then be like, okay, we're going to take a 10 centimeter arbitrary layer at a time and have that screened, right? But it isn't a mitigative method. It is prospection heavy.
So the first one kind of goes down, and you just have sort of the upwards of 2.9 meters of stuff all kind of intermixed. But if you find something in that 2.9 meters, the next thing you do is dig something close by that will give you a little bit more stratigraphic control. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, and to Gabe's point about the stratigraphy, a lot of the time we use a stadia rod, so the same thing surveyors use, which can, go up to 4 meters. We put that in our test pit. We do document the stratigraphy, and I have wonderful technicians. We have a extendable hoe that they use, and they go down and at different intervals they'll scrape the side of the test pit, bring the sediment up, and that's where we get our and we take our samples. In recent times, we've been using like our iPhone Pro Max and doing a 3D LiDAR scan of the test pit right from your phone. Just make sure you have tied something to your phone, or you have a very good phone cradle, or else you're going to be going into a 3-meter deep hole for your iPhone.
Yeah, so you can go down upwards of about 3 meters, like in total, but that's not all kind of on the auger goes down like about like, what is it, like probably 20 to 50 centimeters of depth, or about a meter. Like I guess like they probably come out kind of almost like a big plug. So like how deep does it go on each dip, or does it kind of depend on the sediments and everything?
Yeah, it definitely depends on sediments, depends on time of year. If it's a really nice fine grained sand, you might actually benefit from pre-moistening the sediment before you dig, or else you have that kind of problem of the sides caving in. Peat, for instance, just comes out like a baguette. It retains entirely its shape. You have to rip apart everything to. It's not my favorite, but it really depends. Sometimes I can go a full meter and get a full meter of sediment, and then we use one of their screening techniques to go through it. And if something is found, then it'll be like, okay, well, this was found in the first dip. I call them dips, which is from here to here. And I retain all the notes while I'm excavating. And just so, like, first dip 0 to 100, second dip 100 to 200, third dip 200 to 2.9 or 290, just in case. And we have radio communication, and this is kind of real time. They'll say, hey, test pit 1,240. A second dip was positive for ceramic. And so this is giving us information kind of at that macro scale. If it's a significant enough artifact, then we can go into that more finer detail. However, the goal is the site's there, we find it, then that's where the mitigation, the traditional archaeological techniques and excavation methods, they come in, they swoop in afterward and do all that really great work.
Right. So something I think is kind of interesting. We didn't have this one written down, but I was thinking about this. So you've mentioned that you're testing in like wetlands and peatland. And so you're testing in areas where I don't think anybody does archaeology, right? Like I don't know anybody who has intentionally gone in and tested. Like conventional shovel testing in a peatland is just not going to work, right? So are you finding things in these really unconventional, are you finding sites in these really unconventional locations? And what is that telling you about like landscapes that we don't really have a sense about archaeologically?
Yeah. So we've had a few Acadian Dykeland projects last year. It's the first time we ever actually did work in these types of sites. Back in 2019, we did do a salt marsh testing on the Northumberland coast. And we had success with that. And we showed, yes, this process, it's a little bit harder and the logistics are, you have to work things out, but it's, you can do it and it's worth doing if there's the potential. So let's say we have a site right on the edge of a wetland. You can do the testing in that wetland. And it doesn't have to be people with shovels in, mid-calf water. So we did the testing last year on a couple of Acadian Dykeland sites, and one in particular was pre-expulsion. You can see faintly on LiDAR. LiDAR is great for these Acadian Dykelands. You can see the ditches, the kind of embossed small dykeland remnants that have been muted by water and tide over the last 4 centuries. And we are recovering really early Acadian artifacts from our testing. And it's the same as you would expect if you were near, Fort Nashwauk, and you would expect to find these really early French artifacts. What's really interesting, though, is the deposition of sediment. While the dikes were in use, there was almost no deposition of sediment. You could probably argue there was a loss of sediment because if they're using it for agriculture, they're plowing, and if it gets dry, the wind is taking some of that sediment away. But then you have this really clear deposition of sediment from tidal water incursion that is post Acadian. So you can always kind of figure out when the dike failed, so that marine water came back
That's
in.
cool.
So yeah, it's incredible. And Parks Canada does a lot of really awesome dykeland archaeology, but it's almost entirely mitigation. And so these sites that they're finding, maybe they're putting a new road in for a park. Maybe someone found something on the surface while, they were walking around. But there is now a precedence that, yeah, we can do the testing. We already know if you're inside of a dike wall, we know that it was used by this very specific group of people. And it might have been used prior to that by indigenous groups, but we will only know, and that model of wetlands being low potential will only change if we are doing the testing to get the information that will feed the theory or not. And so if no one ever tests wetland, then you'll never be able to prove that
Yeah.
wetlands aren't high potential, nor can you prove that they're low potential. Um, so it's really exciting. And, the stuff is so well preserved because that marine silt is essentially just layers of clay, and it's, you're pulling cut animal bone that's,
Crazy.
arguably 400 years old, right? And you can still see the marks from the somewhat dull hatchet they used to cut the long bones. So it's just it's so exciting. It's a lot of fun to do too.
And so, a question you probably get asked a lot about this is if the machine damages artifacts and features, and it might be that because it's a prospection technique, two pieces of St. Ange pottery is as good as one. That is possible. But I'm just curious, what would be your response to that? Does it damage artifacts? Tell us about that.
Sure. And like this is the number one kind of pushback I get because at face value, I'm telling you that the guy standing there with the shovels, the spade, and the trowel, I'm trying to replace him, and I'm using my finger quotes here for your listeners, with this big machine with a massive auger on it. I did
Emmanuel,
another
you can put the
pot.
finger quote sound in the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. What is that sound? Now I need to know. But I was on another podcast, and I think I called it the unicorn of death. And then my team was just like, "What are you doing?" And it's just my machine. When the auger's up, it looks like a unicorn. So I just never thought about the branding
What
that way.
color is
But
it?
it is yellow.
Oh, okay.
I
That's a little
should
less
I should
exciting.
paint.
Oh,
I should
it should be
paint it
rainbow. That
white.
would be
Yeah,
very
yeah.
exciting to see this rainbow auger like trucking around.
What does it mean?
Yeah.
But so the machine actually has a very, very low breakage rate. And the reasoning for that, if anyone's familiar with Archimedes screw, it's a system of digging by allowing the soil in front of the bit push the soil on top of the bit up. So like it's a elevator system. So the only part of the bit that is going into the ground is the cutting edge. And as that goes in, the soil's being pushed up the flight. So it's not like a screwdriver and the screw and all the the sawdust is coming out as you're screwing something in. It's actually just an elevator system. It's bringing all the soil up into the casing. And then as we screen it, it's the opposite. It's coming out and it's going through the screener or onto the screen table or however we decide to do the volume reduction screening. And but everything goes through hand screening before the test pit is determined to be positive or negative. But so our we've had intact animal long bones come out of the auger, intact ceramics, intact bottles, and for a machine that can, yes, dig through asphalt, that is not the way we dig the test pit. The test pit, once that machine is in soil, it is like a hot knife through butter. It hauls itself. If I didn't push down on the apparatus with the machine, it would pull my machine forward because it is utilizing Archimedes screw. And
So
to
what you're
dig
saying is they would have found Richard III much earlier, and he would have been undamaged. Basically, that's
I mean, I would never, ever, ever use this machine for the prospection of human remains. But I would like to think that he would have enjoyed that whole system. And, if the alternative is that there's another piece of a machinery, like an excavator from a general contractor, is going to be the machine that finds a site, then it might as well be an archaeology specific machine that's relatively gentle on artifacts, gentle on features. It's not the be all end all. It's replacing, like I said, other machines for ones for archaeology, is finding a lot of sites. That's the other benefit we've had, is we found a lot of sites in the last decade, and we're finding sites that are 2 meters below surface that shovel testing would not have found. And we're very proud of that. And, we're just finding new ways to do things better that isn't going to add to that timeline of archaeology halting progress because we're slow and we're risky. And, that risk kind of gets negated by the fact that yes, we can do deep testing, but we can also do regular testing very fast at high efficiency, uh, very consistent, replicable. I could say to my client tonight, hey, we tested here today and we found something. Are you able to shift 40 meters to the east? And they say, yes, the next day I can test that new alignment. And their project moves forward without, a year's worth of figuring things out. And, what does the archaeology say? And maybe it takes 3 years to do the amount of testing. We've had projects from 4 test pits that no one else could dig because they have to go almost 3 meters deep, to projects that were 10,000 test pits, and everything in between. It's really incredible what this machine has done for the province in terms of these sites that maybe would never have been found and registered just because they were just outside of the realm of what's capable with a shovel.
Yeah, yeah. So on that, like, you mentioned you found a lot of sites. You shared a pretty interesting story about the Dykeland archaeology. So is there a particular case in which you used the machine and you felt like it was really successful, and maybe archaeologically, like the results were something you weren't expecting, or maybe it was like, this is definitely a really good demonstration of the utility of this tool?
Yeah, absolutely. I would argue that every site is really interesting, and even if we don't recover any significant artifacts, we're always learning about different parts of the province and what the sedimentology is like, all of that good stuff.
It's,
Um,
it's all right, Chelsea. You don't need to pretend sedimentology is interesting. It's
no,
you're
it is.
under no
Oh.
such obligations.
We're
Yeah.
we're looking for
This is
the
where
good
I
stuff.
tell you to edit out all the stuff that makes me seem like a huge nerd as I sit in front of one of my many collections of bugs and megalodon teeth.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
The listener won't get treated to the botany collection that's on the wall behind Chelsea. But for those of you that scoot over to YouTube, you'll see this. Yeah.
but yeah, so we're on a project now, just along the Woolastook River Valley, in kind of south central New Brunswick. And the Woolastook has very deep, Woolastook St. John River, um, has very deep alluvial sediments along its many floodplains. Um, Very fertile. However, um, we almost never reach archaeological bottom or culturally sterile sediments when doing any testing um, along the Woolastook. So the project we're on currently, and have been for a few years, um, we are doing that testing to maximum auger depth and finding sites, 2 meters plus below surface. And these are old farmers' fields because they have that rich, silty alluvium at the top, makes them very fertile. But having a meter of silt, followed by a meter of fine grained coarse sand, and then the rest being coarse sand and pebble and fluvial deposits. It's really incredible to dig a test pit and find a dozen quartz flakes, for instance, somewhere at that 1.8, 1.9 meter threshold. A lot of that depth comes from the fact that the first thing that comes out of the machine, is that stratigraphic layer with the artifacts. And so we were able to discern the depth. And so, that site would not have been found. Now, about 50 meters to the west of that test pit that had the site so deep, we found an intact 1975 Volkswagen Super Beetle buried a meter below surface and bright orange. When I first started bringing the sediment out of the auger, a white vinyl seatbelt with the old school square button came out, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I hit a airplane crash or something. And no, they just had a fancy white vinyl interior in this orange Super Beetle. And so we're learning so much about how this site was used, millennia ago, and, the last 100 years, maybe for insurance fraud. I'm not sure. I can confirm there was no king of England within the beetle when we excavated it. And but yeah, so it's just that project alone. The fact that we can do so many 500, I think we're at 700 test pits now, of information. The sites are different vertical levels. They're at different stratigraphic interfaces. And they are also different time periods and spread out horizontally as well. So we can see, for instance, that, okay, there was a paleo channel over here because that coarse sand and pebble, the fluvial deposits, actually are, 80 centimeters deeper in this section that is linear. And so we're kind of also mapping those surficial landscapes of the past, which is really neat because it does not look anything like it does today. And rivers are I want to say living things. They're not, but they meander, they change, and anyone who lives along the Woolastook or in New Brunswick knows about the annual freshet, and every year everybody's holding their breath, the hope that the floodwaters don't rise. But every one of those events can deposit, you know, centimeters of sediment, millimeters of sediment. Just depends on how dynamic the flooding event was that year. So and now imagine that over millennia. You're now 2 meters below surface and potentially have an archaic site. And but maybe you're 80 centimeters below surface and you're finding early French artifacts. And maybe 50 centimeters below surface, you're finding Loyalist period artifacts. And so that's what people don't understand about the deep testing, is how you can get kind of that range, which just allows us to have the potential for gathering more information, more data. If there's charcoal, a really good charcoal sample between two very specific sites that have seriation that can give us really good then you have a charcoal sample in an unrelated test pit. You can weave all that information together and get this beautiful vertical string of information just for that one location. And it's
With the one
really exciting.
intrusive Volkswagen Beetle.
With the one that's it. Unrelated, if anyone needs parts for a 1975 Super Beetle, hit my SD store. Slightly damaged. No, just has a 2-foot wide hole in the middle of the roof.
And so this has been great, Chelsea. We've appreciated talking to you about this, and we're maybe we'll get you back on at some point to talk about the shallow testing applications, which you sort of teased there earlier on too. But maybe to where we could leave this off is, as we mentioned, the statement by the SAA focused really on the United States. But are there any New Brunswick-specific challenges to deep testing, or maybe in the Canadian context? Just what are your thoughts about the SAA recommendations? Kind of riff on the Canadian and New Brunswick context here for a minute, if you've got any thoughts about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I know that they put out their paper last year talking about deep testing, and that is spot on. We needed to have experts in the field talk about how valuable this is, because I think there's a status quo in many parts of North America, but especially in some of the jurisdictions that maybe are chronically underfunded, understaffed. Maybe there's not a lot of development-driven archaeology, or just maybe no lobbying in general to kind of get some of the standards and regulations and modeling and things updated. And so, by essentially doing um, deep testing, uh, like bare bones, like what are we doing as CRM archaeologists? We are making sure that the person who wants to do a project that has ground disturbance has all the information required to make informed decisions. Doesn't mean we make decisions for them. It doesn't even mean we make sure our client's project moves forward. What I tell my clients is, if there is something here, my job is to find it so that you have all the relevant information you need to make informed decisions about the project, and you talked with the people for which you have to, consultation, and that you're not going to be destroying cultural heritage, which is finite, and its context is important. You're not going to destroy that unwittingly. Um, and it's due diligence. And so, bare bones, we're finding the sites. But if we can utilize experts like geoarchaeologists to be more honed, more specific. Let's say you have a project area and you have access to historical photographs. That's invaluable. If you have a photograph of 1927 that shows that the the entire project footprint didn't exist. Maybe it was within a watercourse, and then in the 60s, they infilled and made land into the watercourse. That'll be very important to know. So you're not out there trying to dig a whole bunch of shovel test pits on a filled layer that wasn't there prior to the 60s. That's information that is smart to use and informs what needs to happen next. And geoarchaeology has to be applied to places that you expect these deep sediments. There's places in North America where they don't do shovel testing at all, and that has to do with the fact that they're a desert. They don't have that beautiful podsilized stratigraphy we have here, because every fall we get just a whole bunch of leaves that distribute all across the land, and then they decompose, and you're getting really thick deposition of organics, which then becomes soil, and da 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 da. So we need to utilize these experts, utilize geoarchaeologists, and utilize all the information that's been gathered to date and make the models make sense. If you're collecting information, but it's not being shared, it's not being utilized. I know our friend Trevor talks about the gray literature and the problem of doing the work just to check a compliance box versus, are we actually getting this information to people who could use it, could find value for more people, multiply that data's value, not just from the client, but how will this affect the province, the rights holders, the stakeholders, the future students, the collective heritage of our province, of our nation, of the globe. We're missing the mark on that. So if this information's already collected, let's use it to refine models. Let's get people who are experts in the field looking at this information. Let's get really surgical in doing the archaeology, so we're not burning people out because we don't have enough archaeologists in the country. And let's work smarter, not harder. And so I really think that GTF paper was really important. I hope it opens the eyes of many regulators, of many CRM archaeologists, of professors, to the idea that out of sight, out of mind is no longer uh, a good excuse to not doing the archaeology. Well, I trained in underwater archaeology. That's a big problem for underwater archaeology as well. You're not having 25 people walk down the sidewalk and ask what you're doing. You might be, you and your dive buddy are 30 feet underwater, and no one knows what you're doing, and nobody's going to ask you. And if the client can't see the shipwreck, then it doesn't exist. And so we have technology now, and we have a bunch of people with the same goal of collecting the information, looking for this heritage before they're disturbed. And we just need to focus that into a laser that then just ensures that really good archaeology is being done. Because not only do we want to find the sites, we don't want developers paying for testing that they don't need to. We don't want archaeologists, breaking their backs on really hard testing locations that they don't have to. And we just collect really valuable information. We find the sites, but, with really good data, those historic photos I alluded to, having those photos means everything. Means you're not spending 3 months breaking your back trying to dig through fill. That's what the geoarchaeology information can do for the places that have these deeper sediments. And so I'm just the tool that follows their amazing work. Yes, I just called myself a tool. And I'm saying that they are absolutely right. But the next step between, okay, you found that buried landscape, what's next? I argue it's not maybe a 6-inch core. I argue it might not be monitoring, and it might not be a massive trench that's, 20 meters wide, long and 5 meters wide and 12 meters deep. It could be that we utilize technology like what we're using, what Brian is using in the US, and just do really good archaeology.
That's great.
Well, thank you
Well,
so much.
thank you so
coming on,
much, Chelsea. Yeah, from underwater to under the water table. That's Chelsea Colwell-Pasch of Colbr Consulting. And thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. This has been great.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Bye now. And Ken Holyoke.